is Behind the Mic. Local and worldwide interviews with athletes, entertainers, and you. A talk show that will engage, inform, and take you to the edge, maybe even over. Now, from the Big Z studios in suburban Chicago, here's the host of Behind the Mic, Gary Zahara.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Welcome into another edition of Behind the Mic. I'm your host, Gary Zahara. Great show planned for you tonight. So excited to have this man on. I got to give a nod to Dad again, as you're going to hear throughout the tenure of the show, as I love music even more now as I'm getting older and appreciate it. But, getting picked up from high school in the 80s and then riding to high school and college softball games that him and I umpired, he would always have jazz on. WDCB here and WNUA in Chicago, Ramsey Lewis, Dave Koz, Buddy Rich, Diodato, the list goes on and on. But in 1989, a song on a video about a certain Bulls superstar put this man's name in my head, and I've appreciated his music ever since. Jerome Najee Rashid is his birth name, but to the jazz, R&B world, and the music industry, he's simply known by one word, Najee, and he joins me next.
Brought to you by Team Keys and your financial services division manager, Whitley Brooks Edmondson, and Slugmaster, turning batters into hitters. Log on to slugmaster.com for a dealer near you.
Over 40 years in the music industry for this man, 6 #1 albums, 5 #1 singles. He's on his 2024 tour right now, taking a little break, but he starts back up August 3rd in Portland, Oregon, before making a stop right here in Chicago, September 13th. For the Brian Culbertson's Chicago Jazz Getaway, I want you to please welcome multi-platinum selling saxophonist extraordinaire, Najee. Najee, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Gary. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on and taking some time. You and I have been going back and forth on Instagram and connecting, and like you saw in the opening, Dad was a big jazz fan and wanted to have you on and talk to you about your career and everything going on with you. How's everything been going?
Oh, it's been great, man. Can't complain at all. It's been a wonderful year. I mean, just so much has happened, It's between 23 and 24, man, it's been just wonderful,
So you're on your tour right now. You took a little break. You've made a stop back in Queens. How was it going back home to play?
It was great. I lived in Brooklyn for a while, then we moved to Queens. My mother decided she wanted to raise us in a neighborhood. So we moved to the area called Jamaica Queens, New York. And last weekend was really a special weekend for me because, well, the weekend before last, I think it was, because the neighborhood came out to the concert, a free concert there at St. Albans Park, which is right in the midst of Jamaica Queens neighborhood, And for those who don't know where Jamaica Queens is, if you ever fly into JFK or LaGuardia, there's a whole group of neighborhoods that sit between those two airports, and that's pretty much where I grew up.
Back in the day, I used to cover the Chicago Blackhawks, so I flew into LaGuardia to get over to the Meadowlands to catch a Hawks New Jersey Devils game, but then had to drive back into the city to fly out of LaGuardia because there weren't any. It was actually a pretty quick drive going on the LIE, and so that was my only time going through New York. Was back, I think it was at 2001, 2002, maybe. So,
okay.
Yeah. So,
there is another airport there, Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah, Newark didn't have any flights to Chicago, so I had to come through New York.
Really? Oh, wow.
Interesting.
Okay.
So 1986, your debut album comes out, Najee's Theme, right?
Yes.
It goes gold, earns Grammy nomination, Best Jazz Album. Not a bad start to your career.
No, not at all.
Talk about that. Talk about that first album.
Well, when I recorded the album, I didn't have a clue as to what I was doing. I mean, to be honest with you, I just was in the New York City culture playing, and I had just gotten off a tour with Shaka Khan, the Ain't Nobody tour, which was in 1983. And I was invited to play on a big record, with the legendary R&B singer Melissa Morgan. And her manager at the time said he was interested in signing a jazz artist and invited me to bring some demos, and they signed me, and we put it out on EMI Records at the time, Capital EMI, and the rest is history, man. I mean, just everything just fell into place.
Well,
pretty
that
much.
first album, Najee's Theme, obviously a great tune, but the one that caught my ear and in the beginning of the intro of the show here, Mysterious,
Oh wow.
it was
Ooh,
that was on Michael Jordan's "Come Fly with Me." So
really? Okay.
that's how I got to know about you and about your music,
Oh, okay.
and
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that song. That I actually was a demo for Kenny G. Wayne Brathwaite had written that song. He's passed on, but Wayne Brathwaite had written that song for Kenny G as a demo, and asked me to play it. And then when Kenny passed on it 2 years later, I just took the song and put it on the record as one of the last. Right? I mean, I played an out of tune alto saxophone on there and everything, but hey, man, it worked. You know what I mean?
it's actually on my spring and summer workout playlist that I have
Uh-huh.
on the iPod. And so, did the NBA come to you, or how did you find out when it was going on that video? How did that?
I never even heard about it till just now. Till you just
Really?
told
Are
me.
you serious? I cannot
I'm
believe
very
you.
serious. I've never
Wow.
heard that.
I
No,
think
I
you
didn't
need
know
some
that.
royalties, Najee. We got to get you some royalties for that shit.
What's the video was not come
It's
fly
it's
with me?
it's Michael Jordan, "Come Fly with Me."
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I gotta call him up and get on him about that one.
He owes you some back
Yeah, you owe
back
me some
money for
money,
that.
man.
As you talked about mom, and you grew up in
Yes.
Queens and were born there. Talk about how mom's musical influence
Well,
influenced your career.
my father, I have to say, was an indirect influence because he was, as a matter of fact, he's from a place called Alden, Illinois, which is not far from Chicago. I don't know
No.
if you've ever heard of it. It's about an hour and a half northwest of O'Hare Airport. He was born in that area, and he became a prominent classical musician. His name was Frank Clausen. He was he performed in the New York Symphony Orchestra, New York Philharmonic, the New York Met, NBC Orchestra, and when he passed in 1964, he was a member of the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. But my mother and him, I don't understand how their connection came, but they brought me into the world, and she was always a lover of music. As a young boy, I would listen to Miles Davis records. She would always have George Coleman, or Miles Davis. I mean, King Curtis, and the list is just very long. So, and in our household on Saturdays, the ritual was we would have to clean the house on Saturdays, but she would just play all this great music. And as a kid, I always imagined playing the saxophone. So I would bend these curtain rods up when I was like 6, 7 years old and pretend I was the saxophone player in the music.
Boy, mom must not have been happy bending those curtain rods.
Oh no, I got my beat a couple of times for it, but it was good.
She's a big influence, but when you talk about that, no interest in sports or anything else. You just wanted music.
You know what? I tried to play basketball when I was a kid because every kid in my neighborhood played ball. You know what I mean?
Right.
And but I broke my pinky when I was about maybe 13 or 14 years old, and by that time I was playing. I was like, I don't think this is good if I intend to keep playing.
So you started in clarinet, and then what made you go from clarinet to sax?
Well, I wanted to play saxophone, but I'm a product of New York City education, public education, and then in junior high school, my teacher said, "Listen, all the chairs are taken, but if you play clarinet, you'll be able to play saxophone." And he was right. I picked up the saxophone, and then later on the flute, and it just was natural for me.
Is there a big difference between those two instruments at all? Or?
Well, they're different. They're different instruments. I mean, they truly are. They're part of the woodwind family. But when I came up, part of your education was trying to be prepared for any scenario you may encounter as a musician. So when I was coming up in the mid to late 70s, teachers were still trying to encourage woodwind players to play all the woodwind instruments because they got jobs like TV shows and, playing on shows where they had to play in big bands and things like that, backing up major artists or whatever. So it was not uncommon for the teacher to tell you, well, learn to play more than just saxophone or just the clarinet, or because they were all related in the woodwind family.
When you're growing up, getting into the music industry and you got your opportunities to tour, your first tours were on military bases for the USO.
Yes.
How did those 2 years prepare you with touring with the likes of Benny King and Shaka Khan?
Oh, let me tell you, that was one of the greatest experiences. I was 18 years old, and I tell you that for me it changed my life. Here I am, this kid in New York City, and you could imagine growing up in an urban center like New York. it was my first opportunity to see the world outside of New York City. So my whole perspective of life and my desires for what I wanted out of life instantly changed as a result of that. And for whatever reasons, I still don't understand, but opportunity just always came my way. You know, there were always just as good players around me, but for whatever reasons, people would invite me to join their bands. Benny King, his manager, when I came off that tour with the USO at the age of 19, I was ready to go to college. And that summer, they invited me to play in his band, you know. So that's where it started with him.
Right. Talk about touring with your brother.
Huh? Say again?
Talk about touring with your brother.
Oh, well, you know, we were kids in the local bands. We had our first band that we had in 1973 was called Mystic Funk.
Mystic Funk.
Yeah, everybody, all the bands in Queens had a funk name, you know, the Funk Brothers, not Funk Brothers, but Creative Funk, you know, right. And on and on and on. But anyway, we started in that, and then years later, I had left Boston. I'd gone to school in Boston. I came back and had no money, nowhere to live. And then, you know, and I happened to be sitting on a club playing straight ahead music. And then came Shaka Khan's musical director. And that Sunday, I'll never forget, it was a Sunday, she called me and she said, listen, Shaka wants to hire a horn section. If you can come in and read the charts, there you go. You know, you'll get the gig. So of course, you know, I was gonna make sure I read those charts. And then my brother just happened to come to rehearsal that Tony Maiden from Rufus didn't show up at, and had his guitar, and Shaka was pissed off at Tony. So she said, well, you play guitar, plug up. And he plugged up, and she said, go ahead and solo. And he started solo, and she said, you're hired. You know, and that's how we both ended up in her band together at the same time.
It's funny how things happen a certain way for you. You know,
oh yeah.
You know, you're looking one way and something else comes the other way.
Yeah, you know, there's a saying, and you might have heard this, you know, but there's a saying that some people try to avoid their destiny while traveling on a road trying to avoid it, you know. And I remember there was a time in my life before all that where I sold my horns, I gave it up, went and worked in a bank thinking I was not going to play music anymore, and here I am.
So let's talk about, you were born in Queens, humble beginnings.
Well, actually, I was born in New York City.
Right, born in New York City, and then you moved to Queens. But humble beginnings. Did your mom see you as someone who had the talent? So she said, "Okay, Najee, go and do this. We'll help you out." That kind of thing.
She never discouraged me. She never encouraged me, because, you know, back in those days, you know, the one thing kids would hear from their parents is, go get an education so you can get a good job, you know. Right. So, but she saw I had a natural inclination. She supported it. She gave me my very first saxophone that I owned. Up until that point, I played saxophones from the school, you know, that we would bring home from school. But yeah, but she was always very strong in helping me at that time. So,
you know, the collaborations in your 40 plus years in this industry, like a who's who in music: Shaka Khan, Herbie Hancock, Patti LaBelle, Sheila E., Jeffrey Osborne, Prince, Quincy Jones. Any interesting stories out of that group?
Oh man, I could be here all night with you, man. You know what? I don't want to bore you with all of them, but you know, one thing I will say is I think one of the highlights of collaborations were several people, Al Jarreau being one of them. But Prince, I would have to say, you know, I got the opportunity to tour with him for 3 years and record on some of his one of his studio albums and a couple of his live albums. And it all started out as me just being invited to come out to Paisley Park and hanging out. And, you know, and after 2 weeks of hanging out there, he was like, listen, I'd like you to join the MPG for a 2-week tour. I looked around and 3 years had gone by, you know, so, you know, but it was a great experience. I mean, you know, one thing I say is when I did some press interviews when he passed with CNN and a few others, you know, one thing I would say is, listen, if you want any bad stories about Prince, I have none. You know, I really had none, you know, because it was a great experience.
It seems his aura on stage, was it the same off stage as well?
Yeah, I mean, he was, you know, I mean, he had his days, you know, he's an artist, but honestly, overall, you know, it was at a point in his life and career where he wouldn't even cuss anymore. You know, people would be upset because they come to hear the dirty mind stuff, and he wasn't cussing. You know, he had changed his mind around, and he even had cuss jars around Paisley Park. So if you happen to make a mistake and cuss, you had to drop $5 in a jar, which he always donated to charity and all that stuff. You know?
Did he ever talk when you work with him on tour? Did he ever talk about Purple Rain, the movie, and the soundtrack? What did you think of that?
You know what? He never talked about the actual processes or anything like that.
Right.
I mean, his whole thing is he would have meetings, particularly in cities we would go in when people would come to the sound check that they would pay a fee or whatever. But he would always have meetings on the nature of the industry and how artists should have more rights and all those kind of things, you know. So that was always a great thing that he did, you know.
Talk
He was
about
one of the people I ever met, never worked with, to be honest with you.
talk about getting that phone call from Quincy Jones and wanting to collaborate with him.
You know, it started with George Duke, honestly. And some kind of way, Quincy got in touch with George, and George said, you know, Quincy would love to have you at the Montreux Jazz Festival. And I was like, really, me? You know, I mean, you know, and but it was a real call, and I ended up going over there the first time I worked with him, and I thought I was going to go do what I do, you know, the contemporary jazz thing that I was known for. But it turned out that he paired me with Ron Carter on bass and Toot Steelman, who was alive at that time. And I think it was it was George Duke on piano. And man, it was just an experience because, you know, I thought I was going to do the contemporary thing, but he knew I played straight ahead music. So he paired me with that vibe, you know, which was really nice. You know, and it was so easy to be around him. I mean, he was not, you know, you didn't get this sense of this big giant figure. You know, you didn't get an ego. You got it like he was truly a friend, you know, and just come on in and do what you do.
Well, he was a bit of a perfectionist, though, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, he was. But you know, some people, a real skilled person knows how to bring perfection out of people without making them feel like he's pulling them out of them or intimidating them or anything. He was great at that. Yeah.
You got 17 albums to date in your career. Which one was a labor of love, and which one are you most proud of?
I think they all are. You know, I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to listen to all that stuff, to be honest with you, because when you go back, you say, you know, I've grown a little bit. Everything has been a milestone to grow. But if I had to say any particular one, I would probably say my very first record, because like I said, I didn't know what I was doing, but it was the entree to the world on that level. So
my top 3 tunes for you, I was jamming, as you heard, before we came on, was you know, Best of Najee, obviously Mysterious. I like Vibin' with Airs. I like that too.
Oh yeah, with Roy Ayers, yes.
Yeah, and then the title track from your latest album, Savoir Faire. I'm kind of digging that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
you know, you got an ear because you go for the B cuts. You know.
Yeah. Just, you know what I mean. I grew up in the '70s and '80s, which I think is the best decades of music.
Oh yeah.
All you know. I was born in 1970, so I grew up with.
Okay.
You know, Earth, Wind, and Fire was one of my favorite. They're my top 3 bands. You know what I mean? We'll touch on that a little bit. Also, Chicago, Van Halen, Genesis, Phil Collins. So that type of music, and it leads me into my next question. What do you think of the music industry now, back in the day when you started with all those legends, and now how with the auto tune and how it's somewhat watered down? Your thoughts on the music industry now?
Well, I think a lot has been lost, you know, honestly, because, you know, not saying that you don't have some really good material out there, because I've heard some really good material, but technology has had an effect on things. I think the process is probably a lot different than it was when I was coming up. I mean, you would actually sit with people with a piano and, you know, work out chord changes or groove or something, you know. Now it's like, okay, everything is computer. And that's not true for everyone, but yeah, the process has changed. Doesn't mean the music is not quality, because you do have some very good people out there who are doing quality work, you know. So
a couple of weeks ago in Chicago here, Earth, Wind, and Fire and Chicago came in to tour, and I saw Chicago for the first time. I'll see Earth, Wind, and Fire every time they come into Chicago. In my opinion, you know, 2 of the best horn sections in music history.
yes.
Do you agree with that?
Oh yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's his. We used to try to play both those band songs, you know.
And of course, you got Can't Hide Love on one of your albums. So you know, Wayman Tisdale did a great version of that as well.
Sure, yeah,
you know. So now talk about Saxophonist. Is it a close brotherhood? You know, the late Don Merrick who was replaced by Gary Bias right now with
Yeah.
Earth, Wind and Fire in 1987. Is it a Louis Satterfield?
Yeah.
Is it a brotherhood, the saxophonist crew, or do they all get along, or is it kind of like?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, one of my favorite people to work with in this industry is Dave Koz. I love Dave, and he brings in wonderful, wonderful musicians, mostly saxophone players. So he has Candy Dulfer, he has Eric Darius, Kirk Whalum. I mean, and we all respect and get along. We were on a tour for 2 weeks, straight, and I mean, we had a blast. I mean, it was just so much fun playing with each other, and I would bring people out to come play with me, and they'd invite me to come play with them, and it was just great, So,
Was there an
not
opportunity?
everybody's like that. I don't want to mislead anything. Everybody is like that, but I think mature people who don't really have anything to worry about, that can listen and appreciate and respect the artist from a point of view of it as a human being and as an artist for what they do. Yeah, we get along very well.
Do you want to stay soloist? And the reason why I asked you this question, was there an opportunity for you maybe to collaborate with Maurice White and Earth, Wind and Fire and come in and maybe do some work?
You know what? I would be honored if I was invited to do that. However, I did get an invitation after my first album, because I did Can't Hide Love, from Maurice White. And I spoke to him on the phone, and we talked about me coming over his place, but then he fell ill, and my schedule just couldn't coordinate with him. But that would have been a great honor to work with him.
What do you do to relax, and what's on Najee's playlist if you're sitting and listening to music?
For my playlist, let me see who I've got recently, because I'm always downloading new stuff, so I have to look here.
Do you stay away from your own type of music and listen to maybe some hard rock or some classical?
Yes. Let me tell you who I got in here. I don't know if you're familiar with Jared Lawson. I love him. Jared Lawson. He's a keyboardist. He's smooth jazz, R&B keyboardist. Very, very great. From Portland, actually, I think he's from, or Seattle, I believe. Who else is on here that I have? Frank McComb, Connie Han. I don't know if you know, a jazz pianist, Chinese pianist. So I have quite a few people on here. I mean, Incognito, Dave Koz. I got who in here? Cor Vagabond, which is Brazilian, and on and on and on. John Coltrane,
Oh, Coltrane. Wow. Yeah, there you go.
Vince Mendoza. I mean, these are probably names people don't know, but they've Grammy Award winning people like Vince Mendoza. He's well known in the film industries and stuff.
Dad had some jazz albums, and one of them was autographed by Tony Smith and the Aristocrats. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I in fact, I have it over here off camera, and he signed it to my father, which he called him Deacon. So, and I looked it up, and Tony Smith is actually still here with us. Most of his band, I think, is gone, but it's the Hi-O Silver album. He's sitting on a horse. So I got to get a record player and see what that sounds like. I can't find any Tony Smith on YouTube to play unless I'm missing it. So, do you remember any of that music back in the day?
I don't really. I'm sorry to say.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah. What's the best advice you've gotten in life and in your career?
The best advice that I've gotten personally?
Yeah.
I think the pretty predictable advice, just keep going with it. I mean, like I said, I at one point quit music thinking I wasn't going to be in it. And there was a guy I went to college with at New England Conservatory of Music in Boston around the time that I did that. And we just happened to meet on the street. And he said, "Man, I haven't seen you in school." I said, "Yeah, well, I quit music." He said, "What?" I don't buy it. I don't buy it. No. There are people in that school that should quit, but I don't get it. He said, I told him I sold my horse. He said, no, I don't accept it. He was a piano player, and he would do all these general business gigs in Massachusetts, bar mitzvahs, that kind of thing. And he says, "I have a saxophone. Meet me here tomorrow. I'm going to call you for gigs." And that's how I got back in the game, because I was just working in a bank, And
40 years later, you're sitting here talking to me. So that's
right.
Yeah. What about advice in your career?
Well, I've heard a lot from Roy Ayers when we were young. He kind of helped us in terms of some of the things that we ended up implementing years later when you got control of your own budgets. We went and built our first studio, and we had 3 since that time, So that was one of the things, is taking control of your budgets. One advice I got was from Prince directly, where he actually helped me to get out of the deal I was in with EMI. The same attorney that represented him at Warner Brothers to get him out was the same attorney that represented me to get out. And since that time, I pretty much have operated independently. I mean, I'll do licensing deals with some labels, but generally we pretty much do everything ourselves. So.
Najee is my guest, the saxophonist extraordinaire. We're talking music, his career, and everything in between. All right, Najee, we pretty much went through everything in your career, from your humble beginnings all the way up until where you stand right now on tour. You got a little break. You finished off in Queens a couple days ago, and you're going to be kicking off the tour back in Portland, Oregon.
Yes.
But we're going to do a feature here before you talk about your tour coming up toward the end. It's called In a Word. If you can describe it in a word, fine. If not, just describe it any way you want to.
Okay.
So we're going to start off your brother Fareed.
Lifetime partner, lifetime.
How about performing live?
The greatest, greatest experience.
We talked about this earlier, but the music industry.
Bitter and sweet.
All right, saxophonists in general.
Still looking for that unique voice.
Your career.
Blessed.
Mom.
Couldn't have any other better. The best. Yeah.
All right, final question. Your Najee's legacy. I know it's not going to be a word, but if people were to describe you, your legacy, music, and who you are, what would they say?
Well, hopefully, I've earned my way in the next life. There's a saying by Muhammad Ali that I absolutely love. It says that service to others is the rent you pay for your room in heaven. So that's what I'm hoping to do.
You got 40 years in this industry. You're obviously doing something right. I love your music. I'm glad that somehow by mistake you came onto that video, because I don't think I would have heard of Najee if I didn't hear "Come Flying with Me" and "Mysterious." But talk about the tour now. You're kicking it off in Portland, Oregon, and
yes.
Talk about you're stopping at. I know you're coming into Chicago on the 13th.
Yes.
And what are you going to be doing toward the end of the year? And new album coming up soon, maybe? Or
2025. I'll be releasing a new record with some great special guests on there. I don't want to give them away right now, but 2025. Some of the project I'm doing, I did some of it in Rio de Janeiro, some of it in London, some of it in New York. So we're still trying to struggle to find a title for it, but that combination will be coming out in 2025. So we're almost done with that. And we're touring to the end of the year, pretty much. We end up, we got dates. We're back in the U.S., just doing U.S. dates now. And we end up on the last 3 dates of our tour. We do somewhat of a city winery tour. So we'll end up doing that. And by November, we shut it down for Thanksgiving, for the holiday season, until January. So,
giving nod to New York and Queens, obviously, for music, but outside of that, what's the best area for jazz music in the country?
Listen, I think every city has it. Chicago is definitely one of the best. I would say New York, Detroit, San Francisco, LA. You got it all over the country. Texas, even. You go to Dallas. There's some great musicians down there. So.
September 13th, he comes into Chicago. Brian Culberson's Jazz Festival. Najee, thank you so much for taking some time. Thank you so much for giving me some validation and staying in contact with me. And definitely going to come out and see that show on the 13th. and look forward to seeing you backstage and hanging out with you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks so much for your time, Najee.
Thank you, Kerry.
Brought to you by Team Keys and your financial services division manager, Whitley Brooks Edmondson, and Slugmaster, turning batters into hitters. Log on to slugmaster.com for a dealer near you.
Welcome back. Some final thoughts. Bears training camp in full effect. It's Hall of Fame week here in Chicago. Devin Hester, Steve Mogul McMichael, and the man who had a cup of coffee, Julius Peppers, being inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio on Saturday night. Congratulations to Steve Mongo McMichael. Unfortunately, ALS has taken him away from us, and he won't be able to be at the ceremony. But it's about 5-6 years too late for that induction, and no question that Devin Hester belongs in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the greatest all-time return man in NFL history. I got to say thank you once again to Najee for coming on. Great guy. Great to talk to him about his career in music. It's kind of funny how he didn't remember that he was on Michael Jordan's Come Fly With Me, the first one in 1989. So if Najee, if you're watching this and all your management team, you get some residuals, hook a brother up, all right? Appreciate it. Tonight, thanks to Dahlia Sizer and Fan West and all the management team for putting that interview together. It was a great time, like I said. September 13th, Brian Culbertson's Chicago Jazz Getaway at the Fairmount, Millennium Park. Najee will be there. Tickets at najeeofficial.com and also ticketmaster.com. You can follow him. Go to our links at the bottom in the description of this video. We'll have the links to Najee's website, his Facebook page, also links to my Instagram, the Facebook page. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button and the notification button, and enjoy the shows that we're bringing you. I'm so excited to make another announcement next week. My guest is a funny guy, probably one of the best character actors in the last 25 years in television history. Actor, comedian, and screenwriter David Dean Bottrell going to join me on Behind the Mic. My name's Gary Zahara. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.
Behind the Mic has been brought to you by Team Keys and your financial services division manager, Whitley Brooks Edmondson, specializing in affordable insurance and investments. Team Keys, keep elevating yourself. Call 248-403-0919 to book your appointment. And Slugmaster, turning batters into hitters. Log on to slugmaster.com for a dealer near you. Behind the Mic is a Did He Go production, produced by Z-Force Media. Stage manager is Heather Marie. The executive producer of Behind the Mic is Eric Ferguson.